Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So, I'm back with Mail Order Soulmate. Yes, I'm eating. So, we last left off on page 61, where it says Zach watched Catherine. That's where we left off. So good. And that's where we're going to continue. I have laundry in, so this video may be somewhat short, but I will try and make a few videos today and then have them scheduled to be uploaded so that way I have videos ready for you guys. Okay, let's get started. Zach watched Catherine work her way through a heap of spaghetti. With the first bite, her lashes had fluttered and a low moan of pleasure had escaped. She was indeed a fan of Italian food. As her profile has said, he had to admit having a pretty woman moan over the meal he'd whipped up stroked his ego in a way that made him want to try making a lot more Italian dishes, as well as take a more thorough look at their online chats. How did David know I needed a bassinet? Catherine asked. She was more than halfway through her plate now, her baby cooing in the bassinet beside the table. He'd noted how she'd been taken off guard by Devon's timing as well, causing a sense of caution to roll in. The timing, he had to admit, had been uncanny. Welcome to Blueberry Springs, he said wryly. Well, everyone knows your business, sometimes even before you do. And yet he still knew very little about her business. After that quick call with Logan, he slipped online while she'd still been feeding Savior, and had found a rather short thread of messages that had gone back and forth between them. It sounded as though they mostly used the live texting chat feature, which didn't seem to save messages. In other words, there was little to go on in terms of the history of their wooing, and his memory wasn't bringing up much other than some flirtatious banter, which had been fun. He still hadn't quite wrapped his mind around the legally something of an online marriage, or how he managed to forget so much. But she was here and he was in it. There was nothing to do but move forward. He read the first message where she outlined a bit about herself, which was a decent start. She liked Italian food as well as James Bond movies, so would she like being married to a real-life James Bond if she ever found out about his past? Zach hoped so. She hated bodies of water where you couldn't see the bottom. Despised liars. Wished she knew how to knit. Wanted to belong to a book club. Wished to donate more of her time to local charities, and a few other tidbits that said less about her than he'd like. Catherine's eyes had darkened slightly as he spoke about Devon and his timing, and her brow had frowned. So I could tell she didn't like having people in her business, which was something he understood. She wasn't used to small-town generosity, which was based on the assumption that whatever went around came back again soon enough. You're from the city? Zach asked, eyeing twirling noodles around his fork. He'd grown up in Philadelphia on a street that had mostly kept to itself, other than the lady next door who had more kids than she could handle. With that being With that being his last real neighborhood experience, he found moving to Blueberry Springs disconcerting. Given the community's well-meant but snoopy ways, he found blending in and disappearing into a crowd nearly impossible. For one thing, there were rarely any crowds. For another, he was the new guy in town and therefore had a certain mystery that drew flocks of curious people, leaving them feeling as though his every move was being watched. Not good for a man who spent the past few decades striving to remain invisible, following him to go anywhere and overhear everything. After a few months, because Logan had instructed him to write it out, he discovered that in his new life as a personal security agent, mostly installing puppy cams, a nickname Logan had given home security systems that were more about checking in on the dog while at work than about catching thieves in the act. Having a community on the watch was a good thing. Someone always seemed to have heard or seen something and was more than happy to talk about it, even though it sometimes made Zach feel as though his services redundant. There were enough cases with challenges to keep things interesting. I grew up in the suburbs, Catherine said. In Cyprus? No, she meant his eye. He could tell she was being truthful and yet not helpful. Was she simply reserved, or was it something else? You grew up near London, southwest, I bet? Maybe Egham? Old Windsor? Catherine's eyes widened in surprise before narrowing. Your accent, he explained. A classic London accent with a working class roll. You're an expert. I had a collage from there. Mostly true. Although the arms dealer he'd put away currently wouldn't call him anything as juvenile as a collage. You say some of your vowels the same way. She gave a polite smile and picked up her plate, but Zach thrust out a hand, covering her free one. I get it. You have boundaries and don't want to share your past. I won't pry. But I do need to know a few things. Catherine's eyes were clamped to his hand, her breathing a swallow. He didn't release his gentle grip, and she didn't pull away. There was a warmth from their touch traveling up his arm, almost distracting him from asking what he needed to know. Are you wanted by the police? He asked. She shook her head. Does Xavier's father know you're here? Catherine looked up, her eyes sad. He passed away 9 months ago. Zach's hand slid off hers, a widow, a single mom. Tired and alone, that could explain the fear, the mystery in her past she wanted to leave behind. Was that all it was? She had a feeling there was more and that she wasn't ready to reveal it to him. But if he went digging like Logan had suggested, then he wasn't giving the relationship a chance, was he? He would know things about her, and that would change the situation. It wouldn't allow her to give voice to her personal stories to trust him with. He'd know because he hadn't trusted her. The fact that he was having this conversation with himself told him one thing. Despite the shadows in her past, he wanted to give this relationship a real shot, like a normal man would. A normal man who married someone online. Okay, so he wasn't a poster boy for normal yet. Big deal. The question it was, why was she here? Why had she said I do? And why had he? He was running from his own past, but what was Catherine running from? Grief for something else? Whatever it was, his gut told him that the unpleasantness in her past wasn't immense. She'd be more on edge, more emotional if it was. That meant he could afford to give her some time to reveal herself to him before he asked the boys back at the agency to run a check on her. He tried the real way first. What was that called again? Sharing? He could give it a go. What are you hoping for with this relationship? He asked. She shifted, no doubt uncomfortable about this distraction. Sorry for being so blunt, but if we share our expectations, I think it'll help. She nodded slowly. Sorry, y'all, I'm trying to open this door so I can see see you when the mailman runs. Do you need someone to pay the bills while you stay home with Savior? He pressed. Do you need a partner, a friend, a father for your son, a true spouse, some more kids? The idea of the last one made his chest hurt. What would he say if that was what she was hoping for? He wanted that. Of course he did. But he wasn't so certain he was capable. For a moment he thought she was going to excuse herself and avoid the question. Instead, she tipped her head thoughtfully, her focus hazy as she said honestly, I'm hoping for a fresh start, a quiet town that's perfect for raising kids, a man who'll be at my side, just someone who, she said briefly, met his eyes, a vulnerability exposed for a brief moment. I want quiet, a life of football. That's called soccer here, isn't it? In the minivan, a knitted woolly jumper, someone to sip coffee with me on the patio and watch the sunset. Her lips twisted slightly and she shook her head. That's a tall order. It sounds normal to me. I'd be happy having a partnership that vows caring and kindness, one that offers support as well as independence. Well, he guessed that her descent view hadn't been awesome in the family department. Not that he'd had much of a chance, seeing as he'd likely been about 2 months along before he was permanently removed from the family photo. Catherine's blue eyes were focused on him again. She lost herself, realizing she revealed more than she had intended, and yet she held his gaze slightly, asking if he could provide any of those things. Zach drew a deep breath, his chest tight as he envisioned the life she'd outlined. He wanted that too. It wasn't the moon, just a reasonable slice of commitment. I'm sorry, she said quickly, her cheeks pinking even more. I'm overtired, I guess sentimental sometimes. She stood and Zach swallowed over the lump in his throat. That all sounds pretty good to me. Maybe we should take baby steps. What do people do when they first start dating? Like start with coffee. She let a shaky laugh and he looked at her for not being offended, for seeing the humor in the situation. He stood as well, helping her clear the table. So you're not looking for love. He was embarrassed by the way his words came out, awkward and husky. She gave a quick shake of her head. Of course she wasn't. He was a fool to have asked. The father of a child had passed away less than a year ago. She was grieving. People didn't mail order a spouse because they hoped for a soulmate. They just wanted somewhere to belong to fit. So they were not longer alone. Are you? She asked. Her eyes were dark and wide as she awaited his answer. He gave a slight huff and pushed a hand through his hair. Don't know that love is in the card for me. Bad relationships, she said, carefully, as though unsure how much they could ask each other. Nah, just never really happened for me. He stacked the dishes on the counter over the dishwasher and began running water for the pots. How about you? Maybe. She gave a quick shrug that told him she had found love, but was still feeling it sting. You don't know, he asked, aware he was being a bit cheeky. But he was curious how life had treated and obviously managed to beat up a beautiful, strong woman like Catherine. I thought maybe I had. Her gaze had softened, focused on the distance as though watching a memory float past. It doesn't matter. She opened the dishwasher and began setting plates and coloring neatly inside, maximising space for her system, eerie, similar to his. Neither of us is looking for love, right? Right. He began washing the pots and stacking them in the drainer so they could air dry. We're looking for companionship. He gazed at her. Catherine avoided meeting his eyes and finished with the dishwasher, then took the tea towel off the oven door handle. If you're tired, you don't have to help. It's not to do something homelike and grounding after. She cut herself short. After? It feels like I've been traveling a long time, she said quickly, her moves suddenly jerky. Xavier had colic for the first 2 months, and I developed some bad mental habits. Just surviving, right? I can manage. I can imagine. They worked together in silence, and Zach wondered just exactly what her living conditions had been like in Cyprus with a colicky baby. Judging from her body language, it hadn't been good. Were your parents divorced? He asked, curious if there was more to her not looking for a love story than simply being a grieving mother in need of help. In other words, how soon would she leave him once she was back on her feet? Why was he even thinking that way? Because he'd been trained to prepare for the end of a mission as well as the operation itself? This isn't a mission, he reminded himself. It's life. No, she said. They stuck it out. Yours? By her tone, he gathered that her parents had fought a fair amount and hadn't had a magical marriage. They didn't officially divorce, and I suppose they're still out there somewhere. Assuming they hadn't overdosed on drugs, I was raised by my grandmother. Is she still with us? He shook his head, noting how she carefully avoided asking about his parents. His grandmother had been his whole world, his family. When she was gone, he'd been adrifted from increasingly dangerous missions as he worked his way up the ranks in the military, then increasing the number of secret missions he accepted until he found himself deep in the intelligence business. His grandmother had taught him many skills that still served him well, and they had helped him through difficult times: patience, kindness, understanding, how to cook, how to laugh, but not how to get over her loss. Catherine and Zach had finished the few dishes and stood staring at each other for a long moment. Her gentle gaze was taking him in, trying to see more than he was willing to reveal. She placed a hand over his. I'm sorry. He jerked in surprise at the depth of her insanity, at how much she must have seen. Or maybe he was just used to army men grunting their apologies when they came across that personal history tad bit before moving on. He turned away. She's been gone some time now. You're alone though, aren't you? He gave a minute nod, his back muscles tightening. Are you? As he wiped down the cooled stove, he could hear her behind him as she let out a long, slow breath before saying, by choice. He tossed the cloth in the sink, and she gave him a quick smile that looked as though it hurt her cheeks. He didn't have to ask if she wanted to talk about it to know. The answer was no. Some parts of a person's past weren't fair game, and when it came to idle to get to know you conversations, in fact, they might never be. So we're going to stop here. I put the thing here so I know that we're on chapter 3. So we finished at chapter 2, and so far this story is getting so interesting. He's got to know some about Catherine, and Catherine's got to know some about him, which is a good thing. But I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, y'all.